Right, we are live. It is 2 o'clock in the afternoon here in North Carolina. We'll officially kick this thing off at 2:01. So this is the portion of this live interview where, Jonathan, we can just say whatever we want and we will cut it out. So let it rip.
Do we know how many live viewers are on at any given time?
We can, yeah. Right now we got people streaming in here as we kind of open it up.
Fair enough. Will we open up a chat? Is there an opportunity for a direct chat?
There is. So yeah, people can use the chat or the Q&A button as we're going. And for everyone who's just rolling in here, we'll cover all that in just a second. We're going to start here a 5 seconds. I got to get my game face on. All right, it is 1 after the hour here in beautiful Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Welcome back to another live session with TradePending. We have a wonderful speaker today. We are leveling up your sales game here today. I'd like to give a shout out to Jesse on our team for orchestrating all this and for Alex for turning our mascot, the Wobbly Bird, into Mario. That was a pretty special touch there. I really like that. All right, so you've got me, Matthew, Chief Marketing Officer at TradePending, and I'm really pleased to welcome Jonathan Dawson of Sellchology here today. Hey, Jonathan.
Hi there, Matt. Good to see you.
All right. We're going to get to the full introduction here in just a second here, but there's our contact info. We've got it at the end of this whole thing, too. Don't feel like you got to write it down there just yet. As you would expect, we record this. We will share it out afterwards. We'll email everybody the next day, so you can sit tight for that. And we really hope this will be a live session. Use the Q&A button in the Zoom webinar panel. Use the chat, whatever way you want to get us a question. Just type it in there. Jonathan, I'll field those as they come in and throw them out to you.
Brilliant.
And if you want to see more of the TradePending TV studio and hear some of our best practices that we talk about on a weekly basis, follow us here on those channels. The links work. It's TradePending TV. We're having a lot of fun with that. Even more importantly, maybe almost as important, is if you want one of these new TradePending Miami Vice style t-shirts, we are going to be giving these away in June and announcing it on social media when this giveaway takes place. We gave away the TradePending Top Gun t-shirts last year. Those went really fast. It is first come, first serve. So please go follow us on these sites so that you know when we're posting it and going live with it. All right. With that being said, I think that's the official intro portion of this whole thing. Let me stop. All right. So here we are. Jonathan, welcome. Please just give us the quick backstory about yourself, how you got into automotive, and the backstory of Sellchology.
I appreciate that. So I was born at a very early age, and from there, I just start right out the gate. So I'm a dad. I'm a new dad. I have a 4-year-old, and so I am practicing hokey fatherhood as a father of a 4-year-old. Dad jokes. If you happen to have any dad jokes, you saw my email. Please, any dad jokes that made you smile or make your kids cringe, please forward them to me. So I did get in the business at 22 years old as a newlywed in a small town in Kansas. Prior to that, I was in door-to-door sales. That was my intro into formal forms of sales and commission-based earning, and that was at 17 years old. I was a door-to-door salesperson for 5 years, and I was in that company. I was the number one salesperson in that entire company. We had one salesperson. I was the number one salesperson in that entire company.
You're on fire.
I happened to also be the worst salesperson in that entire company. But no, I started out 17 years old selling door to door, and then over 5 years grew successful in that. Was the top salesperson when we hired more salespeople. Eventually, we grew the team. We had 60-something salespeople representing multiple states, and I retained the title as number one, and I actually became a sales trainer. That's actually how I got started with training. I was very effective in door-to-door sales, and the company I worked for said, "Hey, can you tell everybody how you're doing what you're doing?" So that was my first kind of formal intro into sales training. I got in the car business at 22 in a small town in Kansas, a rural town. There was 5 salespeople. I was the 6th one. All the guys were mad that they were flooding the floor by hiring me. And that was my intro to the car business. We had a Toyota, Dodge, Chrysler, Plymouth, and Jeep store in a small town. And it was tough because most of the salespeople at that store had been in the business for a very long time. I think the youngest as far as tenure at this store was like 8 years, and all the way up to like 13 or 14 years. And then it was me, the new guy. So I was everybody's greeter, basically. I was always greeting somebody else's customer. So it was kind of from a place of desperation. There's an expression some of you probably heard, many of you may be familiar with, that says, necessity is the mother of invention or innovation. Out of necessity, I had to build a referral business. Out of necessity, I had to self-generate business. Out of necessity, I had to create traffic. And I used some strategies that made me successful in door-to-door sales, brought them to the car business, developed them, transferred the psychology principles that made me effective in a totally different industry to the car business. And that helped me become the top salesperson at that store in a really short time, dethroned a guy who was salesman of the year for 13 years in a row, and did it all through rating fan advocates. So that eventually led to me leaving retail, working in the training space, calling on stores, setting up seminars, then being invited in-house, and then eventually that evolved to speaking at conventions, things like this. But that's kind of the origin story compressed into 2.5 minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And I feel like there's a lot more that you could share in terms of all those things you learned during that first job at the dealership. We're going to keep it tight today in around 30 minutes, but you mentioned the psychology of selling here, and that's question number 2. So how was your approach to business coaching and sales coaching different?
Yeah, so this is a big distinction. At least this is the feedback my clients gave me. In fact, the name Sellchology actually kind of came to me in the middle of the night. Like I woke up in the middle of the night with it because I had been at an event. I believe it was like a 20 group, but I was in an event with some dealers, and one of them was asking, so what do you do and what do you do that's different? And I happened to have like my client there who was introducing me to people, and I said, well, I don't want to tell you when I can have somebody else tell you, so I'll let him tell you. You tell him what I do different. And he's like, well, that's the thing. Like what you do is really different. It's like you're not a word track guy, and you're not a process guy, and you're not like a closer guy, and you're not like a motivation guy. But what you do is like so different because you teach guys how to think. You teach them about psychology. You're like a psychology sales guy. You're like a sales psychology guy. That's what really you do that's different than everybody else. At the time, my company and brand was under a completely different brand name, and I was operating under that different name. And then I woke up that night, Sellchology, went to Google, and there wasn't a domain, and there wasn't a Facebook account yet. I'm like, Sellchology, Twitter, Sellchology, Facebook, Sellchology, YouTube. And so the distinction would be this. This is the way I try to frame it. Again, these are stereotypes, so this is generally true. It's good enough that it fits. Is that most trainers, and this also applies to managers, tend to fall into 2 major camps. Their success is based on their process or their personality. So if I'm a process-based trainer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you my steps. I'm going to tell you my word tracks. I'm going to tell you my things that you have to do. If you do this, then that, then this, then that, then you'll be successful. If the customer says this, then you say that. If they do this, then you do that. And here's my process. And it's almost militaristic and like, just do this. That all you got to do is just do what I did back in 1987. You'll be successful like I was. And so you have kind of that approach. Swing the pendulum to the side, and you have this personality approach to training. It's like the secret sauce. You got to walk like me and talk like me and act like me and sound like me and look like me. And if you were just me and not you, Matthew, you'd be successful like I was back in 1997. And the reality is like these 2 things can work, and there's truth behind it. For sure. But I found it frustrating when somebody tried to give me a word track that didn't resonate. And I was like, I don't want to say it like that. And everybody knows the road to the sale, and not every customer has gotten that road to the sale manual, so they don't all follow those steps the same way. And what do you do when a customer steps out of those lines? And how do you control the sale by controlling a customer who doesn't want to be controlled? So I found that approach too restrictive. The other approach I found genuine. Like, I'm not going to sound like somebody else. I'm not going to act like somebody else. I'm not somebody else. I don't want to be somebody else to be successful. So Sellchology is kind of born out of a conviction, a belief that fundamentally this is a people business. More important than it's a process business, it's a people business. And people fall into patterns. And that's why I feel like psychology can even exist. If people didn't fall into patterns of behavior under certain circumstances, you couldn't even have a field called psychology, the ability to study the way people think. So I, from an early age in my life, which helped me be successful in door-to-door and then automotive, I always found that there were principles that ultimately support any technique. So if you tell me a word track, if you say, John, here's what I say in a situation like this, I will tell you the principle that makes that word track effective in certain personalities so that you can recognize the pattern and allowing you to understand more consistently why something would work. So whereas some traders focus on what and how, I focus on why first. Why would something work or not work? And I found, at least with my clients, and this is why they continue to work with me, is that teaching people how to think teaches them how to recognize patterns. And when they have an increased internal sense of confidence, and confidence, as we know, is the root of anything done consistently. Like if you don't have any confidence about something, you won't do it, or you won't do it more than once. But if you have a certain confidence, your consistency increases because your certainty is increased. And when that's increased enough, you have a consistency with a certainty, and you get a consistent result. And so beliefs ultimately drive behaviors. So I start with beliefs. And that's where psychology differentiates. We focus on psychology first because we're convinced it's a people business first, and then everything else can be stacked on top of that.
Thank you for that. Some people wake up in the middle of the night and think of flux capacitors, and some think of psychology. But I feel like we're just going to scratch the surface here today. We might have to bring it back for another session on that. All right, so stepping to the big picture here. So I think we all have a good grasp of it. We understand it, but frame up for us the big picture in automotive as you see it happening today and in the world that you're occupying.
So, it's interesting. For context, I tried to count this, and it's not 100% accurate, but it's close enough. I've been in over 3,000 dealerships physically in 7 countries and 3 continents. So that's enough to say I've seen a lot, right? And when you do that, when you visit a lot of stores, you kind of, again, recognize patterns and trends in the marketplace and things like this. And so where I think like the car business is right now is obviously, again, I don't want to say something that sounds like Captain Obvious here, but, we're in a state of transition again, right? The marketplace has shifted because of inventory supply, and most manufacturers are starting to catch up. And then the most salespeople are starting to panic now. And they've been panicking for some, depending on the brand. Some of them have been panicking for a few weeks, depending when you're watching this, But as inventory supply increased and then the demand decreased a little bit because of interest rates, and there's this kind of weird shift of who can buy a car right now, and you've got a bunch of salespeople, sadly, who were not trained when times were good. I don't want to belabor that point because most of us watching this know we lived it. But we created this negative pattern of entitlement within Salesforce, entitlement of the car deal, entitlement of the profitability. And so for a while, for some stores, you were maximizing your profitability while delivering the worst possible experience to the customer. You were selling simply out of scarcity. You're only influencer. There's 8 primary influencers that I teach in psychology of why a person will do business. And one of them is scarcity. It is a viable and legitimate reason why someone will buy. But when that's your only play, it just diminishes the experience and the relationship. And my business model is based on creating raving fan advocates, not simply transacting and selling a car. So if you had the right car and you could transact. And in normal times, we'll call them normal times, pre-COVID times, and maybe times that some of you are going into now, if you can sell it for a price they're willing to pay, you can transact. The real question is, can you when a customer has choices and when a customer has leverage, can you get them to willingly choose to pay you a premium and tell their friends about it? That's the real thing. So the state of the market right now is, I think, for a lot of stores is transitioning back to a supply increased model. There's going to be a race to the bottom. There's going to be transitions in sales staff because you have people who could make 12 grand selling 12 cars, and now they're going to start seeing $3 months selling 12 cars, and that's going to create a whole disruption in sales for a lot of stores, which is going to force them, because most dealers are reactionary, most management teams are reactionary. They just they're firemen, they're fires for a living. So sadly, what happens then is their recruiting strategies are, we need bodies, which of course creates this whole cycle of turnover, of incompetence and indifference, and then of course apathy, which destroys a store's culture. I mean, so I don't want to be a doomsday sayer. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying I think a lot of stores are going to be in a really bad shape in 3 months. If they're not already trending that way, they will. The stores that were not proactive in their marketing strategies, in their hiring strategies, in their training strategies, the stores that were not proactive, that were sitting back and just enjoying the ride, the wave is crashing, and you're going to get hurt. So that's where I think the market is for a lot of store training.
So it sounds like then being a little bit prepared, or a lot of great thing here. So what should our dealers be thinking about doing to get prepared for this impact that's coming to sales staff and apathy and recruiting?
Yeah, well, so there's a lot of things that go into this. So we'll try to touch on just a couple. But one of them is to decide what you will not tolerate when it comes to store culture and store behaviors and things like this. You're going to have to cast a vision that's compelling, so to want to be part of it. So on the one hand, it's like, I've got to give people a good reason to want to work with us. One of my clients, actually, I got to spend a few days with. I was on the Car Church conference here in Austin. I'm back in Atlanta now. But one of those that went through COVID this last 2 years, 2.5 years, they did it with a sales staff that is non-commissioned sales staff. Non-commissioned, they were paid flats. So this is not so if they sold a car that had $8,000 margin, got paid the same that they would have been paid 2 years prior. So the non-commissioned, they had one person turnover in 2.5 years. By the way, I apologize, that's not accurate. One permanent turnover, which is a person who didn't come back to the company. They lost one salesperson during that period, who during the inflated grosses saw the grass is green on the other side, got lured into that, was gone for 3 months, and then came back. After having 3 months where they could make more money, they came back. Why? Because the culture of this company is so solid. It's such a healthy environment. It's such a good place to work that salespeople knew that I could, quote, make a bunch more money somewhere else, but I wouldn't be fulfilled. I wouldn't have meaning in what I do. I'd be, and so one thing is, as an owner, as an operator, if you're a general manager, general sales manager, if you're an influencer of culture, is it starts with saying, do we have an intentional culture at our company? Do we have core values that are meaningful, that people actually believe? Do we have a mission, not just a mission statement like on a wall somewhere on a plaque, but like, do we actually believe in something that our people want to be part of? So that's a big component for how you can be prepared for the change. Because if you're really building something, people want to get behind it, then they're going to want to push that rock up the mountain with you. The other part is to then recognize that when you have bad, cancerous people or like that, you gotta stop tolerating it. Like, you can't tolerate stuff that's cancerous. I mean, like, and if you think about it in a natural sense, like, if you discovered cancer in someone who you love, you would advise them, go take care of it. Like, get that thing out of your body. Don't see how it works itself out. Don't see how it is in 6 months. Like, take care of it now. And yet management teams oftentimes know of a person. Like, I could ask this in a room full of managers. I do this sometimes as an example. Say, everybody write down the name of somebody that you probably should have fired 3 weeks ago or 3 months ago. And what's funny is, like, people write down names, and if there's more than one manager from the same store, they'll look at each other's list and they'll all have the same name. And then I just ask, like, how do you sustain that? Like, tell me a story that makes sense for why you have someone in your team that you've known shouldn't be part of your team for months, and yet and what is it? Because they sell enough cars? Is that enough? So as long as you sell enough cars, you can be toxic and cancerous to my entire company. Like, how does that make sense? Say it out loud so you can hear yourself. It's crazy talk. So how do you be prepared? Have a compelling vision. The other thing is determine what you're not willing to tolerate anymore, so that you have some clear boundaries and accountability in place. And then equip your people. And of course, as a trainer, what am I going to advise? Train your people. Teach them how to self-generate. Teach them how to prospect. Teach them how to market. Teach them how to be effective. Teach them how to be adaptive. Teach them how to think.
Right.
Or as I might say, teach them psychology, right? Help them relate and have a relational business model instead of a transactional business model. Those are the things that I would give. Again, in a short answer, that's my answer.
Wonderful. So I've got a couple more questions on, like, training and recruiting. I see we're getting close here to the 30-minute mark. We've got 11 minutes, but I want to jump over to the actual leveling up of the sales game here. So you're talking about, was it 8 principles or?
Yeah, sure.
That you have? So just outline for us some of these fundamental truths that you have when it comes to improving the mechanics of selling.
Yeah, so there's certain principles, like I said, fundamental, like in a sales experience, there's certain things that influence a person to say yes, right? So if you take the 8 core influencers in psychology, you're teaching your people how to understand, identify, and recognize them, and then how to make sure that they're aligning with their customer, not alienating the customer, is really important. So I'll briefly kind of outline what they are, and then I might give you an example or two. But in the list of 8, let's just start with the first one, which is the higher authority principle. The higher authority principle is a principle that says that when you believe a person is an expert or knows what they're doing or has unique power or authority to get something done, you trust them differently. And yet we've historically taught our entire sales team, especially you guys, tell people you're new, tell them you don't know, tell them that's the manager's job. I was taught that as a brand new salesperson. Somebody asked you about the sales price or something, tell them that your job is to find them a car. You don't manage pricing. If they ask you about payments, my finance manager does that. We literally taught people to declare that they're ignorant and incompetent, and then wonder why customers have very little trust in us. So the authority principle, the scarcity principle, which we know, we experience, as an influencer. If a person believes that there's limited supply or access to something, they're influenced to take advantage of it. They don't want to miss out. So you have that. You have a commitment principle, the principle that says that if a person believes that it's important to keep their commitments, then what they'll do is judge you by how well you keep yours. So if I'm a high commitment person and you tell me you're going to call me back and you don't, you diminish your influence with me. But if you tell me you're going to call me back and you do, you increase your influence with me. So teaching salespeople how to recognize which customers are likely to be high commitment customers, and then how to influence them by making appropriate commitments. Also recognizing that if you're a very high commitment person, you're also reluctant to make commitments in general, because whatever you say you're going to do, you have to follow through on. So when you're dealing with a customer like that, how do you kind of pull them closer to you or create an environment where they want to come closer to you, even though they're reluctant to make commitments? Then you get into things like social proof, which is, using other people's experience to influence you. We get into things like maybe a liking and familiarity principle, the obligation reciprocity principle, the exemption principle. All these principles are things that make something effective in a conversation with somebody. So when you're using a closing technique, what you're really doing is activating an influencer that causes them to trust you, trust increase, and therefore want to do business. So how do you, from a skill set perspective, how do you level up somebody's game? Teach them how to recognize the patterns that are affecting them. I'll give you another very practical thing that I want every salesperson to do, or every manager to do, is to keep some form of like an objections journal, some sort of document. And this is great as a management team, to have people do it once a week, have everybody bring their objections manual to the room. And in that manual, they would have documented anytime the sale went cattywampus on you, anytime the sale got sticky, anytime the sale went sideways, anytime a customer objection, doesn't matter what it is. And then what you do is you kind of go around the table and ask people, share some of your objection manual comments, put it up on a board, isolate one or two, and then ask this question: not how do we overcome it, not how do we handle it, which is a reactionary way that most people think, but instead, is there something we could do to prevent it? What could we do to prevent this proactively? Is there something we could say or do, or is there something about a process we could adjust to actually eliminate the potential of this objection happening again? So most trainers, and again, this is a general statement, most trainers will teach your people like 157 closes, and they'll teach people how to handle objections and how to rebut to a concern. I don't focus on that. Instead, what I want to say is, okay, how do we create an environment where the customer doesn't want to give you resistance? How do we proactively anticipate through empathy? How do we anticipate objections and introduce them so we don't have to overcome them? And so if you keep an objections manual, it'll help you recognize the patterns, and that's the first step, pattern recognition. That will help you then interrupt the pattern so that it doesn't happen again. It'll create a framework for you to become proactive so that you can introduce things demonstrating empathy and competence. And that's what reduces resistance and allows you to sell something easier instead of having to control or close the deal. Does that make sense, Matthew?
Absolutely is. And we have our first comment. Don, thank you. He says, I like this. I like you too, Jonathan. I appreciate that. In all seriousness, yeah, it makes a ton of sense. I'd love to explore some more of the principles here, but real quick, like if I've gone through the Sellchology training, how do I make it stick? How do I remember the principles and not forget everything once I come up against my first real objection and I just go back to my old way of doing things?
Actually do an exercise with Matthew, and this was unscripted. Oh, no. You asked it, you opened the door, brother. We're going to go.
All right, let's go.
I'm going to teach you the way I would teach a salesperson, and I'm going to demonstrate what it takes to retain something with you. So I'm going to prove. Now, here's what's fun is whatever I'm about to do for you and anybody watching this, you can totally mess with people with this exact same exercise. So I'm going to give you something you can mess with people. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. Okay, so we'll just start with your hands like this. Matthew, put your hands right in. Now, anybody watching this live, if anyone's watching you, you'll look like a goober doing this. But if you want to participate, it's actually kind of funny. Just go ahead, Get over your insecurities. Put your hands like this, everybody. All right, now go like this. Put your hands like this, then like this. Now like this. You're almost there. Now do this. Now, are you doing, Matthew, what I'm doing?
No, I'm doing the opposite.
Are you doing the opposite, Matthew?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're doing it with your left hand. I'm doing it with my right hand.
Is that the difference, Matthew?
Oh, no, there's that too.
Is that the difference, Matthew? How many thumbs do I have up, Matthew?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. No, Matt, that's okay. Stay with me. Stay with me.
You're killing me.
All right. Just do this.
Oh, it's so hard.
Just do this,
Matthew.
Matthew.
Stop it.
Come on. Can you Matthew, follow on?
I can't. No, that's so, it's way harder than it looks.
Isn't that annoying? It's awesome. So, Faith, first of all, thanks for being a good sport. And anybody who tried to play along, thank you for being a good sport on that. You know, what's funny about that is this little exercise exposes the way the brain actually, you see, there's 3 stages, if you will, the brain has to go through. There's an intellectual understanding that must be there, which is to say, if you don't even you can't duplicate it, right? You have to have an intellectual. So when I teach a technique, it has to be taught in a way that somebody can at least understand what I said, right? It can't be just a bunch of gobbledygook or motivational stuff that you're like, I don't get it, but I know I'm supposed to be excited. So it's got to be intellectual. So you want to teach something that people understand. Once they have an intellectual understanding, which is to say, you know, did you intellectually understand what I was doing? Yes, of course you did. So then it goes to an emotional understanding, which is to say a desire to do it. So if I learn something from you that I don't believe in, even though I understand it intellectually, but I don't believe in it or I don't want to do it, it doesn't matter that I understand it. I'm still not going to do it. Why? Because I don't want to, you know, do it my way. For whatever reason, if I don't want to, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to learn it. So you have to have an intellectual understanding met within an emotional layer, which is to say a desire to do it. Now, in your case, you had both. You both intellectually understood what I was doing, and emotionally, you were trying to do it. I can see the look in your face. Everybody watches playback. Yeah, it's like, move fingers, right? So you had an emotional assent. You wanted it. Then you go to the 3rd layer, which is physiological. See, this is where the nervous system kicks in. This is the body, or what sometimes referred to as muscle memory. So the real breakdown for you was not intellectual. It's not that you didn't understand what I asked. It wasn't emotional. It's not that you didn't want to do it. It was physiological. You literally don't have the neural pathways to do it. And this is where most people fail when it comes to learning something new, is they don't give themselves the grace to go beyond the first 2 layers into the layer of neural programming. You have to actually teach your neural synapses of your brain to rewire so that you can do something that you're not familiar with. Now, this is obvious if you've ever raised a child and taught them how to tie their shoe or how to put on a shirt or how to eat food without spilling it all.
3 times, that's terrible.
Right? So this is obvious to us. We know that it's not enough that the kid understands what we asked. It's not enough that they want to do it. If we don't give them an environment where they can fail forward, then we hinder their growth. Well, we as adults do this to ourselves, is we don't give ourselves an environment where we can fail forward. We don't give ourselves the grace to learn how to feel stupid while we're learning something. See, the most common reasons why somebody won't role play is because they don't want to look stupid. But the reality is, anything unfamiliar to you will initially look, people are saying, there's absolutely no way to get around that. There just isn't. And so if you can give yourself the grace to go, I'm going to look, feel, and sound stupid enough times until I don't, I can then learn something. When it comes to training as a leader, if you're a manager, if you're watching this, you're GSM, you're a manager of a store and you have a sales team, you have to love your people enough to create an environment safe enough for them to come together and look, feel, and sound stupid together enough that they become masters of whatever it is you want them to learn, whether that's my techniques or somebody else's. But that's really what it takes. And so anybody watching this can go like this. And if I ask you the question, Matthew, how long have you had your hands, right? I've had my whole life.
Yeah, well, I got them at an early age.
I got them at an early age, right? Like me. So, I mean, who controls your hands? Well, you do. Well, if you control your hands, you had them your whole life, then how come this is so hard? Why is that so hard? And learning requires humility. There's 2 things that top performers about all the time: humility and hunger. If hunger and no humility, you're unbearable. If humility and no hunger, you're not going to do anything. You need both. You need both. And that's what it takes to implement something like that and get consistent change.
Thank you for that. We have another inbound question. This one's actually a question. So, how do you handle the objection, I'm just looking?
That's a great question, actually. So once again, I would ask you to reframe the question and learn to train your brain to think slightly different about the way you even asked it. So instead of asking, how would I handle I'm just looking, it should be asked this way: how do I proactively prevent I'm just looking? So it's a different question. If I ask how to handle it, it's after it's already happened. That'd be like saying, how do I handle an electrical fire in my house? Because my house is prone to electrical fires. What's the best fire extinguisher for electrical fires? An electrician is a better answer than a fire extinguisher for electrical issues, right? So the point is, with an objection, I would say if you wrote, I'm just looking down on your objection journal, and you wrote it down 3 or 4 times in a week, what I would say is, how do I proactively introduce that concept politely so the customer doesn't feel like they have to say it? So in my training, and I'm going to condense it down briefly here for you, but in my training, what I would teach is this: you have to start with the customer's perspective, read the situation, and then go, I'm going to say that for them so that they can hear me address their position. And it would sound like this. I might say, hi, sir, welcome to our dealership. Are you here doing some looking or some shopping a little bit today? Now, Matthew, if you were a customer and I said that to you, what do you think you'd likely say?
I'm gonna.
Are you out doing some looking?
Right?
Yeah. Are you out doing some looking or some shopping today?
Yeah, I'm looking.
Yeah, I'm looking around. I say, great. Now, when you say you're looking, would you say your focus is more product-related information, pricing information, or possibly both? What information are you looking at today?
I'm looking for pricing.
Fantastic. When you say pricing, for some people that's general pricing, other people that's payments, some people it's trade values. What kind of pricing would be helpful?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out my monthly payment.
Yeah, great. Right place. And I can certainly help you with that. When it comes to payments, I'm going to be able to get a couple different scenarios for your computer. Actually does that for you, black and white. Are you looking for payments on something similar to what you have right now? Is it going to be a big change for you? What are you doing that way?
I'm
and then I
hoping
move
to
the conversation forward.
Yeah. Got it.
So I could do that, and if I wanted to, like I said, I could layer. If I wrote down the most common objections: price, payment, interest rate, not buying today, first stop, you don't have what I want, vehicle's not for me, right? Don't have any time. Like, there's really 7 to 10 things any customer will ever say to a salesperson in the first 2 minutes. So your greeting is not a sentence you say. Your greeting is an environment you intentionally create that disarms the customer's barrier. So if I want to, I can bring up time by saying, you know what, I want to be respectful with your time while you're here. To save you some time, can I ask you some questions? And now you're not going to say you don't have time. I can say with first stop, I could say, now, do we have the pleasure of being your first stop, or have you actually been shopping around a few places? And you'll say, actually, you're my first stop. I say, well, thank you for giving us the opportunity. If I wanted to take away the not buying today, I could introduce it and say, now, is this something where you're up against a timeline, or do you have to buy today? Do you have some flexibility? And they say, no, I don't have to buy today. I say, great, I appreciate that you have flexibility. The fact is that if I introduce it, I don't have to then overcome it.
Right.
So to my friend who asked that question, I would just encourage you, keep an objections journal and then ask, if I had to proactively introduce this idea, the keywords, the main concept, how would I frame it in such a way that it would let the customer know that I understand their perspective? This is called empathy. And empathy is one of the greatest assets a great salesperson has, the ability to see the world through another person's eyes and help them understand that you see them too.
With that, let's stop it there. Jonathan, it's fantastic. I do feel like we've got another hour and a half, but we blocked 30 minutes and we've hit that mark. So let's bring this back here. Can't forget that if you want your TradePending Miami Vice shirt, you got to follow us on social media. But for those of you who did make it through to this far, as we always, if you go to that URL, we will mail you one of the TradePending mascots. That is the wobbly bird, also known as the drinking bird. You dunk its head in water, and it will just keep drinking forever and ever. There's a story on our site about why that's the mascot. Enough about that. There's our contact information there. Jonathan, it has been great having you here today. Loved it. Thank you very much. Well, hold on. Is there one more question coming in? Nope, that's it. We're good. Jonathan, thank you again. And,
thank you, Matthew, and thank you to the whole TradePending team for making this possible, and to the viewers live and on recording. My pleasure to serve you. I'm found all over the web like Spider-Man. You can't miss me if you're looking for me. Just go to Google and type in Jonathan Dawson or the word Sellchology, and you'll find me. And if I can serve you or your team, I'm on a mission to save the world one salesperson at a time by teaching salespeople how to out-experience their competition and create raving fan advocates. If that's something you're interested in, reach out to us. Thanks.
Wonderful. Excellent close. Thank you, Jonathan. We'll see you.
All right, bye.
Record.